Welcome to this week's Q&A. I hope all the Aussie expats around the world are doing well. I know some of us in Asia are perhaps not doing as well with some current greater lockdown provisions being put in place, but that's part of containment in this sort of post-COVID pandemic world, I guess. This week's question's a good one, as always, and it's about rentals. What's going to happen to vacancy rates and therefore our rental incomes in Australia if the Australian government keeps international borders closed for another year? Very pertinent right now if you happen to be residing in Singapore, where they just announced tightening to semi-lockdown conditions actually this afternoon. So let's look at that. It is a great question, and luckily we actually now have at least 12 months worth of data since the onset of COVID, so we don't just have to hope and see what's going to happen to our rental incomes and vacancy rates. We can actually look back over the last 12 months and see what has already happened. And it's quite interesting because obviously this person is a little bit fearful of what may happen with international borders being closed for another 12 months. But if we look at what's already transpired, it should give us a little bit of, I guess, peace of mind in terms of what's actually occurring in Australia. And right now, if we look at the past 12 months to April this year, national rents have actually grown at around 4.9%. So that's not a bad outcome. However, rental yields have declined in the main because property prices have gone up more quickly than rents have increased. Overall, both of those things are actually a great outcome. So let's have a look potentially at where something might actually be going astray. And that's in the inner city apartment markets of Melbourne and Sydney. And again, we can't just generalise holus bolus. Most of those apartments that are seeing weakness in rental demand or are being empty and thereby still pushing up vacancy rates are the sort of smaller investor grade units that were really built more for international students in terms of who was going to be their potential tenant. And as we all know, Melbourne and Sydney by far had the lion's share of that, close to 80,000 people in terms of net overseas migration, which is now non-existent. And if we look at the other capital cities around the country, they had a far less significant impact from this lack of international migration. So if we do continue to see this, and it looks fairly likely at this point that Australia is not going to open up its international borders this year at least, what's going to happen? So it depends very much if you already have investment properties, where those are located, what style of properties they are, and if you're going to buy investment properties, then obviously it's really important that you do your research and look at which areas you may look to buy in. So always seek value, but don't get caught in a trap where something appears cheap. Perhaps it's actually not cheap, it's priced that way for a reason. So it's really important to make sure you understand what you're going to get into. And we always tell our clients, buy the best quality of investment property that you can afford to in sought after locations. And I certainly don't think that the inner city apartment markets in Melbourne and Sydney at the moment would potentially tick those boxes. So really important. If we have a look at the current growth in rental yields around Australia, mainly the capital city markets, the only one that's been negative has been Melbourne, still down 2.5%. Sydney's up 1.1%, and you know the rest of the capital cities around Australia are up around 6%. The strongest, I guess, growth areas in rental prices have been both Darwin and Perth, and I mean they were the two markets that really have lagged behind, have had property price declines over the last 7 or so years since their peak. So they're now really catching up and getting some great momentum, which is fantastic, especially for the people that already own investment properties in those places. So if you have a look at current rental yields in general, Sydney sits at around 2.7%, Melbourne around 2.9%, the other capitals around 4.5%. So again, if you're looking for rental yield as part of your overall equation, it certainly shouldn't, I don't think anyone should focus on rental yield as the crux of their investment thesis when they're going to look at buying investment properties. But it is important, as we've seen with many of our clients, where that extra rental income enables them to actually borrow a greater amount to get a better quality property overall. So it all fits together. It's a bit of a Lego set, so you have to know how to put all those little bricks together to end up with the right outcome, the desired outcome that you're searching for. So overall, I guess if we look at what's going on around the country, it's a great question, but it's not one that I think should cause anyone any extra angst or grief. I think the rest of the year is going to pan out in a similar manner, or certainly in a trajectory like we've seen over the last 6 months, where we're going to see continued growth in housing prices in most of the good quality established regions. I think rental prices are going to continue to grow. And on the flip side of that, if you don't look at inner Melbourne and inner Sydney apartments, if you look at some of the regions like, say, the Gold Coast, the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, the North Coast in New South Wales, to a lesser extent the South Coast there, and also Victoria, it's less again in terms of their coastal regions. But some of those areas are experiencing extraordinary growth in rents. Double digits, certainly 15 to 25% in some places on the Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast. So if you've positioned your portfolio well for what's happening, continue to do that. I don't think this extra period of closure of the international borders is going to cause us much grief from that respect. In an overall manner though, I think that Australia does need to look at reopening its borders in a safe but progressive manner so that we can start getting the economy humming along again properly, and that requires people to be able to move and go in and out of Australia. So that's a sort of pretty comprehensive answer to that question. If anyone has any specific further things that they'd like to add to that, or they want to find out about what's going to happen potentially to the rental in an area where they own property, just let us know, reach out. We'll either cover it in our Q&As, or I can organise a Zoom meeting and we can go through that individually. I hope everyone stays safe and has a great time, and thanks for joining our Q&A this week. All the very best to everyone around the world.